You're listening to the Indie 500 podcast, where each week we break down a different album from the NME magazine Top 500 Albums list. This week we'll spare you our usual antics and instead share the next part in our Know Your NME series, when we get to know some of the personalities behind the list, the writers and contributors at NME magazine when the list was crafted. This week we spoke with David Renshaw, who is now writing and podcasting for thefader.com. We hope you enjoy listening as much as we did recording. Thanks again to David for the interview, and for those of you listening.
Hi, listeners. We are in our second installment today of a segment that we're calling Know Your NME, where we get to talk to the contributors whose personal top albums list got factored into the actual 2013 NME Top 500 Albums list. And today we are talking to David Renshaw. Just off the top, thank you so much for giving us the time and being here with us.
No, it's a pleasure. I'm looking forward to chatting about where I was 12 years ago.
So tell us about you now and what you're doing currently.
So currently, I was at NME between 2012 and 2016. After in 2016, went to work for The Fader, which is another music publication, New York-based publication, but I stayed in London. And I've been there since. I've kind of really clung on in and, just kind of found a good home there. So, and that's where I've been for the last sort of 8-9 years and currently as well.
So for The Fader, are you the lone person overseas? Are you the satellite office?
Yeah. So when I joined, there was a London office. There was a few other kind of writers and editors. And over time, that's kind of shrunk down a little bit. So it's just me in the UK, but I'm part of the wider team that's based kind of between New York, and we have a few people in Toronto as well. So, it's a fairly widespread, small team of us at the moment, and I am the only UK based person right now.
And when I was searching around for your name, I found that you do podcast interviews for them. So is the news there your main gig, and then you get to do stuff like that? Or?
It's kind of it's changed over the 8 years I've been there. Initially, I was very much like a news writer, kind of when someone released a new song or did something, got arrested, and anywhere somewhere between those two things would be like my job to grab that news and write it up. And then as things have changed over the years, my role has changed slightly. I still do write news as and when it's needed, but I'm obviously doing more features, interviews. We had an interview podcast series for a long time that I contributed to quite regularly. I just see myself as kind of very much whatever's needed, I am there to do.
Yeah. Just before we came on, I was listening to the episode where you got to talk to Flying Lotus.
Oh, nice. Okay.
About his music and his show, Yasuke. Yeah. I love his music. I actually found out about that podcast pretty late, so I was like, I better find an episode and listen.
But it's kind of it's not the most produced podcast in the world, but in terms of just pure conversation, I think we had some really good chats on there between me and the rest of the team. So
that's good.
Yeah, I think we can be proud of what we did with that one.
That's our style too.
Yeah.
Talk and put out the content,
Yeah, just see what goes down. Okay, so tell us more about your time at the NME and kind of leading up to the time that the list was coming together and getting published.
Yeah, so the issue, which I actually have here. I
Holy
don't know if you've
smokes.
ever seen a print copy of this. Yeah, I know. It's a real relic. Came out 2013. I think I'd been at NME around a year. So relatively new. It had always been the place I wanted to work kind of since I was a teenager, very much like kind of set my mind on it as an ambitious kind of 12-year-old or whatever, and managed to make it work eventually, which was obviously kind of very exciting at the time. And yeah, I think as Alan said in your interview with him, it was a kind of transitional period. It was the latter days of the print magazine being on the newsstands with a price tag attached. I don't know how much this one, £1.95 or something like that. How much did it cost? £2.80. Wow, that's quite expensive. But so yeah, it was the very last days of it costing money because it went free not long after. So the this iteration of the magazine, looking back, I think it was very much like doubling down on the audience that we knew was still buying it and still interested in what NME had to say, and kind of really kind of super serving them. So it's very like, as is reflected in the list, kind of like quite indie rock, guitar music heavy. NME's always been that, but I think we really kind of was like, I think there was a sense of that this is the audience and we need to give them what they expect when they pick up and subscribe. So yeah, it was Mike Williams was the editor. He brought in a kind of team of newer writers, quite a lot more women in particular. I think like Laura Snapes was a features editor at the time. There was Emily Mackay, a lot of contributors, new contributors, new voices, bit of a new energy. It was a good time. Like I've got a big stack of the issues from that time, and when I go back through it, there's lots of really good stuff. And I think the kind of critical voice was in quite a good place at the time. It felt true to kind of the NME's history, but also had a good idea of what was like really good taste, as well as being true to the lineage and the history of NME as well. So,
Yeah, I remember
yeah.
one of the things, like one of the things we found out as we were talking to Alan was that, you know, when we started the list and we were trying to look for, you know, items and things to kind of think about and talk about, one of the things that popped up a few times was, you know, wow, this Arctic Monkeys album was only a couple months old and it made the list. Then, you know, years and years later, NME goes back and they say that same album, I believe it's AM, was their favorite of the 2010s. So, you know, you can't, you know, obviously somebody was on the money there when they got it included and it got voted in, even though it was so new. Like,
Yeah, I think that was kind of like, if you talk about what was NME like at that time, I think there was a very strong sense of who our bands were. Like there was a big loyalty to quite a small group of bands and artists, and Oasis would definitely have been one of them. The Strokes would be one of them, and Arctic Monkeys obviously was one of them. Kind of very much championed them from the very beginning, and there was huge excitement around that album, which had only just come out. It was relatively new, and was already being placed in the kind of lineage of greatest of all time. And I think part of NME's spirit and energy, like from throughout history, has been kind of a kind of giddy excitement about what is new. I think that's a great thing. I think that should be always the way you kind of approach these things. And so, yeah, I think as much as I think there was always going to be something brand new in that list, and it happened to be something that I think they could feel confident would stand the test of time. But I do kind of feel like there would have been something of that nature in there, whoever it was. Do you know what I mean? Like it was always going to be there would always be a 2013, 2012 kind of album in the mix somewhere, because you want to have that burst of kind of newness within a very kind of history list of albums and artists.
Or somebody putting 5 national albums on their top 5, you know, little championing going on there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's kind of what led us to, you know, center the show around the NME list. Is, you know, there's a perspective, and there's a little more of that going on. You know, even though it's a list that was published more than 10 years ago, like you can see the perspective, and you can see, you know, chances being taken. You know, we had, you know, obviously we looked at like the Rolling Stone list and things like that to possibly use, but like I felt like it was a little more generalized, and it was a little more kind of staid and safe. But
Too
when we
familiar.
look at we look at the NME list and we're like, oh, well, half the time, because half the time we're gonna pick an album at random, and it's gonna be something we know or something we like, and half the time it's gonna be something we're gonna learn about. So we thought that would
Yeah,
help.
no, I think it's very much a product of its time. It's a very 2013 idea of what
Yeah.
the best music is. I think it arrived pre-streaming, pre-poptimism kind of taking a hold, and the kind of more mainstream music being considered like held in equal esteem as the guitar music and rock music. And I kind of think I look back on it with fondness, in that reminds me of when I was there and the music I grew up loving. I do think it's kind of, a real kind of a relic of its time. I would say it very much feels like the kind of last gasp of slightly kind of gatekeepery era of a small number of people telling a larger group of people what they should respect and admire. And I think that's kind of flipped on its head now, and you've got a much broader array of music. And I think we're better off now, but I do kind of still have a fondness for a time when you could kind of say, this is the world, forget everything else, because we're telling the Smiths made the 5 best albums of all time, that kind of thing.
And you mentioned the Strokes. I did find a page where it lists the top 10 lists of different people who had contributed. I don't know if it's comprehensive. It sounded like there was probably more people who put in lists. But of those people I believe you were the only one who had listed the Strokes, even in everybody's top 10s.
Okay.
I wrote down here, is it a burden to be so correct and good?
It is a lifelong burden, and I've never been able to get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm surprised. I can't remember where I finished in the overall list, but in my head, again, everyone's sense of NME is dictated by their age and when they kind of were a teenager, I think. And my era was very much like, I think I would say the reason I started reading NME was because I had discovered the Strokes as a teenager and was like, where can I find out more about this band? And would see them on the cover and start buying it that way. And they were very much my in to the magazine.
And they did land at number 4, so it's not that nobody else was including them, because I don't think you could have done that.
No,
with the way it's calculated.
So that list you're talking about, which is there's a page on the website. I think that is the staff who are in the office. So we have like freelancers and contributors, but I think the people who are actually day to day in the office is the people that had theirs published. That's my recollection of scanning it this morning and seeing the names and faces on there.
Yeah, and that's also basically our dream list of interviews too.
Right. Yeah. If you need any help contacting people, let me know and I'll do what I can.
We just may. Do you remember what I mean? If you've seen that page, you might remember. But do you remember what your top 10 was?
Yeah, I was reading it this morning. Full disclosure, I had a zero memory of this list. I stand by some of it, and I would move away from the others. But like,
how do you not remember a list?
Well, I mean, as proven by also the 500 Greatest Songs of the Year issue, 500 Greatest Songs of All Time, the 50 albums of the year. We were making a lot of lists. This is the thing. I think Alan mentioned this, but also I think to remember about this is list magazines sold well, or were certainly more grabbable, because that's the kind of thing that you leave on your coffee table and can pick up at any time. Whereas a feature with a band whose album is out that week is a bit more disposable. So I think there was quite a big move towards that type feature and that type of special issues. And also, it was around the time NME.com has always been a very big website ahead of its time. And at the time, obviously lists do huge numbers online. So I think there was, as a twin kind of assault of this is how to get good magazine sales and also web traffic, lists, as you can imagine, was the way forward. So yeah, I was submitting a lot of lists, writing a lot of blurbs, and my memory of any of them is very, very sketchy. Yeah, so I think on this list, I've voted for like a lot of Smith's albums. I remember being quite surprised by that. I would have one of these. I would not have three of them. But individually, I stand by all of these being great albums. I have no problem with any of them. As a collection, it starts to make me cringe a little bit, but that's just because I'm bad at making lists. Like I hate. I think the best way to make me hate anything is to put it in a top 10, and I will immediately not like it.
Yeah. The one that jumped out at me that I was kind of wrestling with over the last week too was the White Stripes. Their very first album was at number 3, and in 2013, at that point, everything that they made is out. So that's that's kind of a statement saying that their first one was the best. But I was going to say this week I was listening to Distill or the Steel, and I was like, these like first 3 really are like, I think that might be my favorite stuff from them too. Now that I'm listening back.
Yeah, there's a band that literally the first kind of gig live show I ever saw was the White Stripes. A band I've always had a lot of affection for, and would always kind of, I think at the time, I think in looking at this list, I'm kind of leaning into NME history a little bit, but also kind of looking to establish what I would see as a more modern version of that. Like, to me, Oasis, as much as they're a band kind of very much of in my lifetime, feel a generation before me. Like, I'm not the same age as the guys in that band. I'm not the same age as Jack White, but I remember them being a new band essentially. So they feel part of me. I can't necessarily say why I put that album over the later ones. I think, but yeah, to me, that and Elephant would be the standout White Stripes album. So it was always going to kind of represent a band who I kind of associated very much with the reason I wanted to write NME and be in that world, and they were definitely one of them. So I think it was a natural thing to put them on that list as a kind of nod to why I wanted to be there and why it was an important part of my life.
So on your list when you're putting it together, like, was that your philosophy of what you put together, or was there anything that you felt like Alan told us that he felt like he was on a little bit of a mission to push super furry animals? Was there anybody where you were like, maybe if I'm trying to make an objective list, they don't have them there.
Yeah,
but, was there anybody you're advocating for?
I don't remember having a philosophy. I can say that much. I think so. This is the thing. This is the interesting thing about this list and this project you're doing, and these kind of things in general is I think my relationship to the canon has always been a bit weird. I have huge blind spots in my musical history. There's
no, that's us too.
A lot of people that I'm kind of like embarrassed, basically have never listened to. I've always been a new music person. In my head, the reason when I discovered the Strokes or the Arctic Monkeys or anything, the thing that excited me about them was not, oh, this kind of sounds a bit like television, or this has got some of this influence. I can see the lineage through time. It's this is happening right now. This is brand new to my ears, and it's kind of making me think in ways I've never thought before. So going back through time where things start to feel a bit more closed off and a bit more like a museum artifact, it never excited me as much. And then also I think it just becomes a bit intimidating to kind of get into the Bruce Springsteen back catalogue at some point. You're kind of like, where do I begin? Maybe I just won't. So I do look at this list, and I guess my philosophy would be a slightly kind of young person's naive approach at what I think the best albums of all time are. It's kind of quite a bit polite, a little, as much as I stand by them, and I wouldn't have put something on there that I hadn't listened to or didn't love. I think it's very much like these are safe. These are what I know to be great. No one's going to kind of question me, and I'm happy to put them down and have them, especially knowing how voting works. If you put something in your top 10, it's going to push it quite high in the list because it's a relatively small number of contributors. So yeah, I think I could stand by Nirvana, Oasis, The Smiths. Like, these are NME bands. These are bands that we've always written or talked about. So I would say that was my philosophy. My philosophy would be somewhere between the music I've kind of grown up loving and things I know to be kind of my favorites within the kind of established NME world as well.
So it was an honorable approach. You you weren't you were planting anybody.
No, I definitely
kickbacks.
had no agenda. No.
Okay.
You already mentioned the Laura Snape's national list. To be honest,
that is one of the most fun facts of the.
I respect it so much, like so much more. That I remember it being a bit of a joke at the time. It was definitely a joke in the office. That I think that's what it's about, like a personal list.
But you can't stop them. So
yeah,
if that's what they want, that's what they want. Like
I think there's as I say, like the ding on my list, if I was looking at it, would be it's a little bit anonymous. It's a little bit, and as much as I stand by it, it's not me. It's a grab bag of
general once
a grab bag of great albums. Whereas Laura's is Laura's, and she stands. I don't know if she would still stand by that band. I'm sure she probably does, but do you know what I mean? Like I kind of wish I had a bit more of that. I definitely didn't have an agenda to push someone from the outside in. I was like, this is the inside, and I'm going to pick my favorites.
Well, that's nice. Well, okay, so you and Alan have offered help finding people, and we did email. I list which email I thought that Laura used. So if you guys do have contact for her, let her know. We would love to have her on.
Yeah, and I've not spoken in a while. But
right?
If I can
really, anybody and everybody who was even just around at the time, like, we'd love to. I mean, we had so much fun. We're so honored to have Alan on, and now you, like, it's kind of beyond what we had imagined at the initial idea of the podcast, which was truly just us in our group chat saying, you know what, we should really do something.
I think you've kind of, as you say, the NME one has a bit of a perspective and an agenda, I guess, because it's a very specific publication. It's the Rolling Stone list, especially the one they published more recently, is really good. Like I would say there's probably more albums on there that I would now want to listen to. But what you're entering into is this whole world of British music journalism and the kind of very specific biases that we have and have had and do have. And kind of untangling that, I think, is going to be an interesting project for you. I think you're going to learn as much about the kind of psyche of the. Are you familiar with the term Six Music Dad?
Oh no,
no.
I'm afraid it might describe us stuff.
Yeah, maybe it's not a bad thing. There's a lot of them. So Six Music Dad is kind of like maybe a guy who's a little bit older, late 30s to 50s, kind of the radio station Six Music in this country plays a lot of kind of their playlist is quite similar to this albums list. There'll be a lot of the people on there, and they like to discover new bands, but specifically new bands who sound like old bands. If you sound new or different, not so much. But if you sound exactly like Pavement, or you sound exactly like The Strokes or whatever, they go big. And they just become a very identifiable character trope in the UK.
That is a little bit us.
It's good to know we have a place to fit in if you ever go over there.
Yeah, a little bit of everyone. But yeah, you're going to learn a lot about this kind of school of thinking about music. I think it's as I say, it's a product of its time, and there's still a hangover of it. But things have changed so much now that it does kind of scream 2013, not 2025.
Yeah, and I think there was a time when me and Helio were like getting to the end of high school, and we had our collection of bands. But I think back then, and it may have been actually a friend of ours, I think, had a subscription to NME, and he would recommend stuff to us and kind of go back and forth. But I think that our bands and our taste at the time actually leaned a little bit towards NME, either because of that or just naturally of what we were grabbing. And then also the NME list like leans a little bit towards us too. So that was another reason it's sort of meeting in the middle. Like,
Yeah, no, I think
I was really excited to talk about like Bell and Sebastian and Pulp and stuff like that. And it's like, I think a lot of people over here are the same, but
Well,
no,
and we
I
had,
like
the
the idea of
Strokes
the
and Interpol, those
yeah.
bands coming up, but at the same time, rock wasn't, the major player in the United States at the time. So a good opportunity for us to branch out and learn new artists.
Mhm.
yeah, definitely. That's kind of an interesting, that kind of transatlantic exchange is interesting because, as I say, the Strokes, Interpol, White Stripes, that's very much my era, my kind of first discovering
Yeah.
music. I think music
Same
that I
with
would
us.
call my own. That was my time. And I think the majority of those bands are bands who made it big in the UK before the US. And that's
Mhm.
something that we've done a lot in the past. But then similarly, there are a lot of bands. I think you mentioned Bell and Sebastian, particularly. I think bands who have a very kind of strong identity, a very un-American identity. I think Bell and Sebastian could only be from Glasgow. I think that appeals to a US audience. So they kind of they have a following directly of being from where they're from. In the same way that British people, I think, are really into the idea of a guitar band from particularly New York, but America. There's something kind of alluring and exciting about that. I think it works in reverse with a band like, and I think that's a kind of interesting way of looking at things.
Yeah. One of my big, one of big, I get to use it now. One of my big six music dad bands was Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. And I didn't know that before they were popular in the United States, like they really got their footing going over to the UK and playing there. And that's who was first, like very excited about them. And I was like, I would have never guessed, or I would have never known, like if I wasn't watching, like a documentary that mentioned it. But
I think the reasons, I think we get a lot of credibility from this, like, you're so far ahead. It's just easier to break this country because it's smaller. If you
Mm.
get on one TV show or one radio playlist, you're miles ahead. Whereas in the States, it's going to take you 6 months just to play the West Coast, that kind of thing. It's a little bit a product of the way the country is kind of structured. But yeah, as I say, we've always had a kind of an interest and a desire to hear what's coming over from the US. And as my list, my top 10 reflects, it's always been something I've gravitated towards. When I was young, it was the Strokes, it was Interpol, it was the White Stripes, it was Kings of Leon, it was all these kind of bands. So it's nice to be able to trade back and forth.
So is there anything, after the publication of the list, like post 2013, if they were to do an update, do you think are there any albums or artists that you think would definitely be kind of storming the list if it was remade again today?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, and perhaps I'm overthinking this, but where surely the space for overthinking an NME list is a
Mhm.
podcast dedicated to the whole list.
Mhm.
So you've got a very 2013 way of looking at music reflected in this list, and then you've got a 2025 way of looking at music. So I think
Yeah. It's
I
very
was
different
looking
now.
at like stuff that's come out in the last decade. If the editorial kind of mindset had stayed exactly the same and hadn't, like I said, taken on kind of the idea of pop music, the idea of people becoming like attached to genre, people discovering music from kind of Spanish language music or Korean music, all these kind of things that have changed in the last decade, who we would have put in a modern version. I was thinking, I think Kendrick Lamar would have multiple albums in there. I think To Pimp a Butterfly would be really high. I think Tame Impala Currents would be very high. I think that would have been a really big kind of NME album for that office and kind of way appreciating music. Yeezus by Kanye. I know My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy is very high. I think Yeezus would be right up there as well. And the Fiona Apple, Fetch the Bolt Test. I see that as being a real kind of big one in that world. But then separately, you've got a more modern way of looking at things, and kind of like fascinated to see how Lana Del Rey would be accepted into that kind of way of thinking. Charlie XCX, Brad, the big album, Beyonce, Renaissance, and a personal favorite of mine, which is Sophie's Oil of Every Pearl, and Inside's album, kind of incredibly forward-thinking and visionary music. So yeah, as I say, divided between those two sides. But if you can get on board with that way of thinking, there was this like this is what music is, and now that has shifted. But between those, I think they would all in the maybe not top 100, but somewhere high.
Yeah, once you have 500 albums, you've got a little bit of room.
It's a lot of albums. It really is. You've got your work cut out. I'm not going to pretend.
We're currently, I think we crossed the 1% line.
Okay.
I think we now have 6 albums in the episodes published, but
if we do one a week, we're on pace to finish in August of 2034. So it's a couple albums. Yeah.
Yeah. You need to start cranking them out like Joe Rogan.
We realize that like Dexy's Midnight Runners, they have 3 albums. They might get 1 episode, but we'll see. Yeah.
Well, Neil Young has 4. We found out. So, but I think we can give him a little time. But yeah, we have. It's one of those things. When we found out that Dexy's Midnight Runners has 3 albums, here we know them for 1 song, but I'm like, that has to indicate something else is going on. Like maybe.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize they had 3 albums. I remember there was a few.
Maybe there's somebody who was pushing it.
Yeah, that's definitely. If you ever get to speak to Dan Stubbs, who's one of the people on that list, he's a Dexys fan. I do think he would have probably pushed quite hard because that's not as much as I know that they have their fans. They are kind of similarly thought of here. I would say is very much like a specific taste. I think there's plenty of people who are not going to like them as much as people who do. But yeah, I hadn't realized there's so much Dexys in there. That's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and it is interesting thinking about kind of doubling back like the Lana Del Rey's and the Charlie XCX, because even as big as they are in the grand scheme of things, they are almost they're almost the punks within their genre. The people who would say like, that's my favorite, they're still kind of staking a claim of being a little bit of a subculture to the pop that we have now. So
yeah, I would say that they both occupy a kind of alternative space within the pop mainstream. And I think that would have been something that would have gravitated towards that kind of independent way of thinking. So I think there would be space for them. I agree. As I say, I mean, you look at this list, it's very white, it's very male, it's very, it's quite, things have changed so much. It's really quite hard to get your head around that way of thinking without taking away anything from any of the albums that are listed and ranked, because I think we just think of how we kind of categorize things and where they take place in history a totally different way. And I think it's much better now. Yeah, it's hard to get head. The idea of, I would imagine that if NME, the current iteration of NME, did a 500 list right now, Taylor Swift would be in there somewhere. Of course she would. You've gone into the NME office in 2013 and played a Taylor Swift song, album, if she was releasing music at the time, you would have got laughed out of the room. It's not even that there was necessarily a huge snobbery. I think it's just a sense of that exists. So we're here, and the two paths don't really cross. So yeah, so much.
And to give 2013 NME credit, we had mentioned Kendrick Lamar. His album Good Kid, Mad City is in there. We just did the episode on Funkadelic's One Nation Under a Groove. So when we sit, when we do point out, or we do say, the list is quite, male and quite white, it's skewing that way, but it's not it's not solely dedicated. You know, there's
Oh no. Within the
it's very
500,
there's still
there
progressive
is room.
picks. Yeah, yeah, and Funkadelic was up there. What? I should know the number. We just did it, but it's
David, I just want you to know that you made an 8-year-old female music fan very happy with your Taylor Swift comment that she would now make the list.
I
my
want to
daughter's
say
still
that
asking
may be
me
the first time she's been
when we're going to talk about her.
we have decided that every once in a while we will do what we call pit stop episodes, where like if there's something that we just need to talk about that is not going to have any chance to come up on the list, like we'll take a mini-sode or like a little detour and be like, okay, we're gonna, like we did one on, or Helio did one on Black Sabbath and Ozzy when the news came out that they were doing their farewell tour.
Right, yeah, because I know you wanted to talk about the lack of metal on the list.
Yes, and actually that was kind of, when you mentioned, you know, the people getting laughed out of the office or snobbery, like that made me think of that too. Like, do you do you have any insights into why that might be, that, you know, that like Black Sabbath and Iron Maiden and, well, it's like Deep Purple doesn't show up, and
Priest.
Yeah. Oh yeah, Judas Priest was the big one. I was like, at least one of those should have showed up in 500, but yeah, we're still. That was our mystery we're trying to figure out.
Snobbery is the reality of why they're not on the list. I think I can't pretend that I'm a huge fan. I do like Black Sabbath, the other bands you mentioned, the kind of Judas Priest, Iron Maidens. That's never been a thing that I've listened to. I think it's a relic of that kind of like tribalism we talk about. I think even in the earlier stages when kind of pop music had its reputation that some people wouldn't want to be seen associating with, I think it didn't quite have the stigma that metal does here, even though metal is obviously huge and there's all these bands and we have a very kind of rich history of producing great, inventing metal music. So yeah, I think the honest answer is that metal has always, especially in terms of journalism and magazines, that it was covered by, you know, Metal Hammer and Kerrang and these kind of publications that were specialist and niche, and I think was just not seen as something that we had any kind of authority over, and similarly didn't really want to. So it's a blind spot for sure, and it's one to be honest that continues today. Like the most kind of forward-thinking, kind of progressive publication. If you look at any end-of-year list for 2024, I would say there's very little metal music on there. It's still on the sidelines.
And I was going to say, if you're not allowed to be a music snob while working at NME, like, so, you know, we wouldn't denigrate anyone for it, but we did want to find out if there was reasons, and we're starting to put the picture together.
You know, there was never anyone, as you say, like Alan was really pushing Super Furry Animals, and someone was pushing Pixies. It's not like there was someone trying to push Iron Maiden and everyone else kind of hitting and booing. I think it just wouldn't have come up in conversation. I don't think anyone who was really passionate about that music. And there are NME writers in the past, people that I'm thinking of, who have been more that way, I feel like leaning. But in that iteration of NME, and it just as I say, in general, I think, there's always been a slight snobbery or just a kind of ignorance around metal and its place in the canon. I don't know how you'd begin to unpack that because it's a little bit complicated. But there's no real reason for it. It's just a thing a barrier that's never quite been broken down.
Okay, and the last interrogation along those kind of lines. Was there a specific reason that no Queen ended up on the list that you know of?
Well, I would have booed and hissed if someone tried to put the album in.
Oh.
Yeah, I know I had very, very low power in the end results of this list, but
people did.
There's no Queen in the 500.
No. Yeah, that was a shocker to us.
Here's a question: Are you guys Queen fans?
I would say yes. Yeah.
Do Queen? And forgive me if I'm wrong. I'm asking. I know, I'll explain why I know what I know, but not what I'm about to ask. Do Queen have a classic album?
I think if you're gonna pull one out, it would be A Night at the Opera, which is where Bohemian Rhapsody comes from. I want to say there's at least, but
That's something we had talked about on our first episode, where some of these artists, it's almost the best album is a greatest hits package. So how can you
Yeah.
justify putting a greatest hits, on a top 500? Even though, yes, like the band is all time great, but this isn't a band list. This isn't a song list. This is a album list.
yeah, and I guess even that album, Bohemian Rhapsody, is the song there. Like there's a couple others that I think may have been somewhat big. I know the B-side on that is I'm in Love with My Car, which which Roger Taylor like reportedly kind of forced them into by locking himself in a cabinet, if I remember right. But yeah, I thought there was at least one other hit there. But yeah, that may be it. Their hits are kind of spread among different albums, so maybe it was just they were just a victim of not having a consensus.
Yeah, to be honest, that does surprise me. I would have thought, I do think there would have been a kind of rule of no greatest hits, and
Yeah.
Queen's greatest hits is kind of maybe wrong, but certainly one of the best selling albums of all time in Britain. Certainly the album they're kind of most affiliated with. It's not kind of like, I would say it's the album that majority of certainly people who've discovered them in the last kind of 30 years would come in via. So I think there's an argument for allowing that to be in there and representing. As I've made clear, I'm not a huge fan, but I appreciate their importance, and they kind of, I think it's a little bit strange to have the 500 greatest albums of all time with no mention of this huge band. But yeah, my guess would be more along the lines of there's not an obvious can than it being a kind of people bands, because I know they were, and I know that their place in the canon is kind of very, very firmly established.
And it's fun. And another reason we ended up picking the list is kind of the way that it's put together. You can't especially with the list like this, one of the things you're always going to do is look at an album and then look at like what's immediately before it and what's immediately behind it and be like, really? But the way it is mathematically calculated, and there's so many people who contributed, it kind of absolves the list from those things. Like there's no one person or one very small group of people who sat down and said, Arcade Fire goes right ahead of David Bowie. Like,
Yeah,
it's just how it worked out. Like there's nobody who said like exactly that.
Yeah, the thing about lists, and this is true of end of year lists and these kind of bigger greatest of all time kind of projects, is they're democratic to an extent. There is a point at which people start fiddling, and this can be for various reasons. It can be, if you're talking like this is kind of very nuts and bolts stuff, but if you're putting out a spread on a double page, like, here we go, like I've got like the issue here. If it ended up mathematically, the numbers meant that one page was dominated by 3 Dexys Midnight Runners albums, you're going to move some of them around, so your page doesn't look that repetitive. And similarly at the top end, maybe who you want to put on the cover changes by who you have highly up. I'm not saying that's what happened here. I'm saying that in my history of voting in various end of year lists and various lists in general, they're not pure democracy. They are to an extent, and then that picture is kind of fiddled with by a smaller team of people to some extent for various reasons, and none of them particularly kind of nefarious. But separately to that, I don't know if you guys feel the same. Outside of I guess it has to come into percentages, like because this is 500, and you don't normally see 500 long lists. I don't know, what does it mean to be 450th on this list versus 350th?
Yeah.
It doesn't really mean anything. Like when you crack a certain mark, then it starts to mean something. But when I read end of year lists, I tend to avoid anything lower than a 20 or 30, because I was just a bit like, I will obviously like check things out and use them as a guide of what's good and what's not. But I've never rushed to Spotify to put on something because it's the 49th album of that year.
Yeah.
So it's a lot of honorable mentions at that point, and
exactly.
as opposed to the 20 best. Yeah.
So yeah, I think when you get to the lower numbers on this list, the idea that like if you've got Bruce Springsteen directly followed by LCD Sound System, I don't think it necessarily means NME thinks LCD Sound System is better than Bruce Springsteen. I think it's just the way it kind of shook out in the voting.
This is a bucket of Legos for the last 100 that we've got.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm trying to think of what is the lowest number that hit. I want to say it may have been the Patti Smith album, but yeah, so at the end of our main episodes, we'll hit a random number generator to tell us what comes next. And I think for like 3 episodes in a row, we were still in the top half of the list. So we were very much in there. I forget what we did that broke 250. I want to say it may have been the Shins.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how you guys go about navigating the 500, because starting at 500 and going down to 1, as you say.
It'd be a little hard.
Bear with us, this podcast gets interesting in 2030.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's kind of why we did random. Just so nobody can accuse us of starting off at number 1 and then we get to 100 and say like
Yeah, no, totally. It's a commitment.
So yeah, I did remember being a little scared of the first time we rolled a number that we would end up at like number 1 or something within the top 10, and people would say, "Oh, that's they didn't really do that random. They chose." But I promise to all listeners and everybody, we've abided by what the random number generator has given us so far.
No, I think that's a good way of going about it. And yeah, just I guess you feel like going high and going low and kind of covering the bases because obviously some of them, the higher numbers are where you get the real kind of classics, and there's a lot to chew over. Yeah. But lower down, you're discovering things. I'm sure there's things lower on the list that people don't know as well. Like, I can't remember who's in the kind of 500 era region, but
yeah, even the other way around, like we've talked about, there's going to be episodes from the top 50 or the top 10 where, when we hit Nirvana's Nevermind, you have probably hundreds and hundreds of hours of even specifically podcasts that have talked about Nirvana's Nevermind. So, so like,
what do we add to that?
Chew into that? Yeah. Do we really chew into it, or are we going to take like some kind of very specific or talk about it, personally?
Were you saying you were considering artist centric episodes, so like you do all the Neil Young ones, or?
Yeah. We kind of said if we get to and we always specifically said that about Dexys. Like when we get to that bridge, when we get to that bridge, we'll cross it. Like there may be episodes where we take out, 3 in a row on what episode if we really feel like it. But I enjoy the idea of being pure and about it so far, and just taking what it gives us and doing.
Yeah, it's led to some fun discoveries so far too of music we hadn't otherwise thought to dig into. This week, our artist is New, the krautrock band from the 70s.
Yeah.
And like for me, it was okay. I heard Kraftwerk. I'm not going to listen to New. I'm not going to listen to anything else. I'm done with that. But put it on this week. Oh, okay. This is actually like proto-punk and like pre-ambient works type stuff. That's completely different than what I expected.
Yeah, no, I think as well, listening to it as a project, as doing this podcast that you guys are doing, is a really good way of going about hearing these albums. It's like I said,
it's kind of selfish on our part, even if nobody else was listening. Like we at the start of the year we kind of said we want to find new stuff and kind of educate ourselves for these classic albums and things that we didn't listen to and kind of genres that we didn't listened to when we, before or anything like that. So it's like a new year. It was sort of a New Year's resolution for us and a system of doing that. But at the
Yeah,
same
no,
time, like
I think
maybe
it's a
maybe
good one
maybe other
because
people might want to hear.
yeah, like I said, I have these huge blind spots, and I just saw
Mhm.
the Bob Dylan movie, The Complete Unknown, and I was like, yeah, that title's not ironic. I don't know anything about you. And I should go back and I should listen to these albums. And you kind of like put them all in your Spotify list and, put them on while you're working and cooking and stuff. And it's like, that's not how they're meant to be listened to. It's not background music. You're meant to kind of, the, the albums that really make an impact. And I think it is kind of reflected maybe in some of the list of stuff I voted for. They're like a part of the fabric of your life that you remember where
Yeah.
you were when you heard them. They remind you of specific people, specific times. That, that access to all of the music in the world that we have now is fantastic. But I think it's kind of cheapened the relationship to the music itself. And the fact that you can kind of pick these albums and go through them and discuss them and get each other's perspectives and have those kind of experiences is a much more fulfilling way of hearing music
Mhm.
than, as I say, yeah, just sticking it on your laptop and kind of as you
Yeah.
go about your day, which is
Yeah.
it's how I listen to the majority of my music. It does start to feel like a less than perfect way of hearing kind of these classic albums.
Yeah, and when I initially thought of it, I thought, well, this is going to be how because sometimes I need a gimmick to make me do something like this. Like this is how I'm going to make myself pay attention to this album. But like you said, like I didn't realize at the time, listening to it and talking to my co-host and talking to other people about them, it is attaching those kind of memories and experiences, as opposed to if I was just doing this on my own and I told myself this year we're going to sit down and listen to all of these albums, like it's different.
Yeah, totally. I think one of the kind of things that I listen to a lot of music, obviously for my job and because I want to hear everything. And I've always been a real kind of, as much as I keep talking about how I don't know any old artists, I do know plenty. And I literally listen to kind of as much new music as I can. I'm, kind of like, this is kind of revealing more about myself than I probably should, but like I keep like a spreadsheet of every album that I listen to and it's like crosses like the 600 mark every year. And this is just new stuff. And so I'm really kind of like in the weeds of it. And it's how I kind of orientate and navigate my way around my work. But
I was
it's
gonna say
also,
you're the newsman, so you're allowed.
yeah, I have to know who everyone is basically. But yeah, at certain points when you've kind of like, you've logged your 8th album of the day on your spreadsheet and you think, did I even notice a lot of that? Like, I'm just consuming, I'm not experiencing. And I think that's a really important thing to try and do more of is to kind of experience things rather than just consume them. So I do definitely respect the project you've got going. And I think you'll get a lot out of it.
Yeah.
We've talked about a little bit about this too in some of our episodes. Like, what is your ideal listening experience? Are you like putting a vinyl on the turntable and sitting down and having a pint? Are you going to experience a band live for the first time and that's your introduction? Like, what's your way to jump in and really digest something?
Uh, it varies, I'm certainly not the vinyl kind of drink and sit quietly guy. I think it's like, I honestly, in more recent years, I think some of the music I've discovered the most that's had the biggest impression has been in needle drops in movies and TV and kind of hearing
Yeah.
things that when there's
Yeah.
a visual element and it's part of a story that I'm following. That's been a really kind of big thing for me in more recent times. I think when I was younger, it would be going out and hearing stuff kind of in clubs and live at festivals. Still do that. Still definitely do that. I just saw a really great band, High Vis, hardcore band from Liverpool. They came and played in London. I mean, you talk about metal. I know that hardcore has had kind of a relative, kind of critical post Turnstile, I think a lot of people are like taking it more seriously and giving it the credit it's always deserved, which is kind of timely, but also, where were you 10 years ago? And a lot of that stuff that I listen to a lot of the hardcore bands, and I'm like, this is going to be so good live, but it's sitting on my laptop. That's not doing anything for me. I need to get out and see it. So I think it's genre to genre. It can vary, like in the same way that kind of a singer-songwriter who's making very kind of quiet, beautiful music. I'll see that they're playing here in London, and I'll kind of think, I don't know if I want to see that. I don't think that's what I go to live music for. So yeah, I think I vary on how I approach things, but it's a mix of kind of, as I say, I'm always playing music. I like kind of 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. I've got stuff on, and I don't really sit and work quietly. I have stuff playing constantly. I'm always listening to things, and it's an imperfect system, but I do find that the good stuff seeps through, and the stuff that's less impactful just doesn't make the impact regardless of how you listen to it. So that's kind of been my method for the last however long, quite a long time now.
And that's, you mentioned finding music through shows and movies that'll use a track. Like I think that's more common than I thought, because often I'll go to somebody's Spotify page, and especially if it's a band I know, sometimes their very top song with the most plays I will see, and I'll say, why is that the one? And then like I look it up a little bit and I say, oh, so they played this in this TV show that I don't watch. Or
yeah.
I think that happened with And You'll Know Us by the Trail of Dead. Like, I've been a fan of theirs. I'm always on their Spotify and stuff like that. But like one day I popped in there and there was like one song from an album that I know I like, but that I know wasn't a big thing. And I said, what happened here? But they I guess they used it as part of a soundtrack for actually like a fight in the comedy show or something like that.
Right, okay.
But like that can really do it for people.
I don't know what it is. I think it's just you kind of mentioned that idea like of putting on a vinyl copy and really sitting and observing it, and that's never really kind of interested me. But I think it's just in the sense of I am sitting and focusing on the music. I think that the visual kind of story, whether it's film or TV, has a similar effect. It's kind of, you're zeroed in, right? You're not, especially if you're in the kind of cinema or theater, there's no distractions. So I think maybe I don't want to get too big picture about things, but the amount of distractions there are in life, and the way that I do think the streaming era has kind of reduced music to an accessory in people's lives. Anything that pushes it front and center is it to be kind of protected, I think. And I can see the similarities between the screen and the kind of really kind of ritualistic kind of sense of putting on vinyl and that kind of thing.
I hadn't thought about that. Especially when you get a movie that really goes out of its way to do that. I feel like that's going to catch people. Like we were just talking about Justice on an episode recently, and that's another one where I think they got a big pop because they used one of their songs in the last John Wick movie.
Right. Yeah. Stress? That song Stress is in that.
It's and yeah, like I know.
I think I was messaging you when I put that album on, and the whole time I'm like, oh man, this is perfect for a John Wick movie. Oh, I can just imagine it now. And then you're like, oh yeah, that's the song that actually was in John Wick. You're not that creative and imagining it. It was in there.
and that one's fun because that one's like in France too. So it's a little bit of a a hat tip too, where it's like, hey, we've got these French guys in this French movie, got their French music and it fits. Like, yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. I just saw Justice live last month. It was great. If you get a chance to see their new live show, I think they're touring the States at some point. I think they're playing Coachella and touring around that.
I know they came through our area, but the the date that they were in Seattle was my wife's birthday, so I didn't mess around.
It's a tough sell, that one,
Husband points there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she even gave me I think, you never know when these things are a test, but she did say, like, oh, it's the day of is a Thursday. I was like, I'm not. What is the Tom Hardy meme? That's bait. So,
Yeah.
but I do know that they come through semi regularly. So I'm gonna
So
get
they were on the 500 somewhere, yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure Cross is.
Right.
Did I click away from it? My tab. Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the interesting things about the list is, one of the things that will dictate some of the entries is recency bias. Which I think some of the stuff that when I was looking through it earlier, I was like, okay, that was kind of because people were the Octo Monkeys thing is one and LCD Sound System, but then also I think some of the stuff. So bands who are considered great are trend cycles within themselves. Like there'll be periods where lots of new bands, they come out and cite Fleetwood Mac as a reference. And suddenly Fleetwood Mac stop in the kind of classic, the firmament of great music rises and someone else's falls because they're not kind of being seen as an influence, or they're not on a big tour, or there's not a documentary about them, or that kind of thing. Like, I think, I'm not sure how high Talking Heads come in this list, but I would imagine if there was a new one, a band like Talking Heads, who in the last sort of 5-10 years have really, as much as they've always been well loved and well respected, I think are now much more seen as really important in a way that they perhaps weren't a decade ago. So I think that's an interesting thing to really kind of look at, and it feels very much like a kind of the ocean, and things can be at different heights any given time.
Yeah, not to date ourselves, but I feel like me and my co-host almost got our first experience of that when we started seeing kids with Nirvana shirts, and kind of seeing kids talk about Green Day's Dookie almost the same way that we used to talk about like Led Zeppelin and The Who, stuff that was before our time, that, like you said, is cycling back. And
no,
it's like got us, even though it's not, it's probably more of our parents' thing, but
especially the way the trend cycles work now. It used to be every 20 years an era would be revisited and kind of discovered again, and now it's more like 10 pushing 5 almost. Like it's kind of ridiculous.
And I was telling my co-host, I'm kind of waiting for the kids who went through that to make bands. Like I'm waiting to hear who discovered Green Day and Nirvana like that, and like, are they going to pick up guitars and make something? Kind of like I noticed maybe about 10 years ago, people kind of gravitated towards like 80s synth music, and John Carpenter literally is kind of pulled back into the spotlight, and everybody loved his soundtracks, and he came back and started making music. But there's also a whole genre of people who are making, can't remember what the name is, but it's like the Kavinsky thing, like the Drive soundtrack and things like that. Like that was one that I really recognized, like, oh, people pick this back up and start. It's a little easier because you can make that music just on computers rather than getting all your friends together in a garage with the drum set and stuff like that. But like, people really seem to have zeroed in on that and said, like, let's kind of perfect this and bring it back. Like,
I think I do remember an NME list that we worked on. I don't know when it would be, and it was kind of the most influential artists of all time. So not necessarily the best, but the most influential, like kind of sense, like, the Velvet Underground. Everyone who saw them started a band, and they kind of created this whole lineage of everything. And I remember there being some things on there that people were very kind of skeptical about at the time, because it was very much like a snapshot of the time. This is the new bands that we're discovering and writing about. Well, this is who they've listened to, and what shaped them, and that kind of puts them in in the picture. So it was, these things are always, as I say, kind of snapshots of a particular time, a particular moment, a particular group of people. You have to kind of really take everything with a pinch of salt and not kind of, they're the start of a conversation. They're not a full stop.
Yeah. And, that, as we've seen, people are always allowed to come back and update them or change them or just make a whole new one too. So.
Yeah. I mean, the idea that you would update it 2025 is great. And then revisit that in 2035 and see how ridiculous your list looks. It will look.
It will happen. I think we covered everything Hila, did you have anything?
I guess just to put you on the spot before we wrap up, what would your number one album be today if you were sitting down to work on this list? I'm not going to press you for 10 or 50 or even 500. Number one, what do you got?
Imagine if I just reeled off a list of 50 albums.
I'll take it.
We could do a podcast about it.
Yeah.
I think maybe I'm so bad at this. Like I say, as soon as I start kind of committing things,
once you say it, you can email us and say, "Can you change it?"
We'll W in with some AI. Yeah, if you need to change it.
I think you said, is there a band that you're really kind of pushing? I didn't need to push Arctic Monkeys, but the more I think about it, that is the band of my lifetime. I think that I'm kind of the same age as that band. I discovered them very early. Like, I remember buying a kind of CDR of their demo off eBay that did not work, but I didn't know how to kind of torrent music at the time. It was very early kind of internet days, at least for me. And seeing them, I saw them on the NME tour, which is a big thing we used to have here. Like, so the NME would have awards every year, kind of like Grammys or the Brit Award kind of. And there would be a tour attached to that, like a live tour of 4 bands that would go around the country and culminate in the kind of night before the award ceremony. It was a big deal. Like, a lot of really, really big people have played it when they were starting out. And the year I started university, Arctic Monkeys were on this tour, and it was them. Here we go: Mystery Jets, We Are Scientists, and Maximo Pop, which are 3 names I'm sure you have not heard in a long time, and certainly not in the 500. But
those are some deep cuts. On our scale, at least for me, some of the names did sound familiar, but that's probably where it's.
I mean, don't worry if you're not up to date with them.
We've come to find, we talked about it earlier, but we've come to find that we shouldn't feel embarrassed when we say we don't know a band, because even when you cut it down to 500 of the greatest albums, there's so many times where you just don't know these people, or only so many hours in the day to listen to a band. But
this is the thing. So the reason I kind of say Arctic Monkeys are the band that I can stand by and kind of have always stood by is that a lot of that stuff I was listening to when I was a teenager, I have a place in my heart for it, but I'm not listening to it. I kind of have moved on, and my tastes have changed, and things have changed. And Arctic Monkeys are a band that I've always gone back to. I still can listen to that debut album, and it feels as kind of exciting as when I first heard it. And they've changed as well. I think a thing that I've kind of struggled with, some of that stuff is bands reach a certain point and they kind of, for various reasons, appear to kind of give up a little bit, and they start repeating themselves. And so they've never done that.
The one album that I actually kind of know from them and have listened to a few times is the Tranquility Base Hotel and Casino, which I've heard is not exactly like representative of what everybody loves them for. But
I think that's why I was.
But I've heard that one, and I love that one.
Yeah, it's a really good album. I think that's, what I was saying was that they're not a band who have become kind of a museum to themselves. There's no nostalgia, there's no repeating things, there's no kind of like anniversary tour of the debut album. The kind of the nostalgia thing just doesn't appeal to me whatsoever. So the bands from my kind of youth, I guess in my head term my NME days, reading NME, certainly as a reader, are the ones that I kind of still hold a lot of affection for. are the ones that have kind of moved and innovated and changed with the times. And they've done that. And they've kind of, I think some people feel they've become a bit of a parody, and they certainly like very much like moved to LA and become very kind of an LA band. But I
But
think I
they've always
really like
been a
music,
little
and they
funny
kind of,
too.
sorry.
Oh, I was saying they've always had a humor and a funniness to them too. So like, so
Oh yeah,
when you
yeah.
do that, you're allowed a little more leeway on
No, yeah,
parody.
so there's someone that I've kind of watched grow and change, and as I, in my mind, have certainly, if not got better, then kept things interesting and fresh, and it
Yeah.
stops the older music sort of becoming a bit of a relic alongside it. That's my view. I I think I have a relatively short attention span for bands when they start repeat. When you get to like 4 or 5 albums in, and you're just a bit like, more of the same, okay. And it starts to make you reassess the earlier stuff because you're hearing these kind of like photocopied versions of the originals, and they've never done. Yeah, they're. I think they've kind of got a similar ethos to making music as I have to listening to it and enjoying it. And I feel like I can say that's probably my favorite album for personal reasons of all time.
Well, I was going to say another fun Arctic Monkeys fact among the list and among bands in general. The only one that we know guaranteed has heard the name of this podcast is the drummer Matt from Arctic Monkeys, because he was on another podcast that we sent in like a mailbag question to and like snuck our name in.
Oh, right. Okay.
There's another music podcast that kind of inspired ours. We sent a question.
Is that,
and he was actually
is that band splitting?
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
That was kind of the one, we had been fans of Bandsplank for a long time, and Helio I knew had done other podcasts, actually like sports podcasts. And just one day I was sitting, and I know we're both huge fans of that show, and I said, why don't we do something kind of like that? So that is kind of the seed of where it came from. But yeah, I thought that was, I'm always going to think that's funny, is that he may be the only actual band member who's had a modicum of knowledge of what this podcast is.
No, yeah, it's definitely a band. They're from Sheffield in Yorkshire, and that's where I was. I'm not from Sheffield, but I'm from Yorkshire, and so having that kind of northern band in my life as well has always kind of been something I've kind of felt a kind of kinship with. But yeah, see, I've never interviewed
we
them.
carry
I've
the
never
torch for
written about them
grunge
or
too,
anything.
because...
I think maybe I've literally never written one word about them, which is kind of strange. But I guess at NME there's a bit of a hierarchy, and I was never quite high up enough the ladder to get to touch the gods that they were. Yeah, they're like, you were in the basement, and there's someone on the top floor will write about this. But
well, you're up on a pedestal to us for sure.
But yeah,
NME's basement is our
album that you mentioned. I think I had that in my notes as definitely one that would be an updated version on either side of my overly complicated different 2025 2013 approaches to making a list. It'd be a book.
Well, David, where can we find you now, like on the socials or in the fader?
Yeah, so my majority of my work is on the fader.com, which is where I'm kind of published most days. I also have a Substack, which is where I'm writing about TV currently. That's called TV Party. If you want to be one of the while the doors are freshly open and be on the ground floor, as they say, then yeah, to check that out. I've on the site when I'm talking about hearing music through TV and movies. That's because that's where I spend when I'm not listening to music. What I'm doing, I watch a lot. I've written for like places like The Guardian and Vulture in the past, and yeah, I'm doing a bit more of that under my own steam as well at the moment, trying the Substack route and seeing how that goes. And yeah, I'm on social media trying. I don't use it very much because it feels depressing and bleak.
Yeah.
But I will put links to my
Yeah.
work on there as well.
All right. Yeah. Send us the link to the TV Party Substack, and we'll make sure.
I will. Yeah, I will do. Cheers.
Well, I just signed up for it. Done and done.
Perfect. This is how I get my subscribers up. I'm doing one podcast today
Exactly.
until like
Yeah.
A crossover. Yep.
Same with us when we interviewed Alan and he said he listened to an episode. I said one more listener.
this is how you do it.
Yeah. we're gonna recruit NME contributors one by one to listen to their own episodes to boost our numbers.
This would be if NME was up and running now, they would make this podcast.
They should.
if the NME that made the list, sorry, I know NME is still obviously up and running, but the version that we're talking about, the area that we're talking about, this would be a perfect accompaniment to a huge issue like this and all the work that went into it. So I think you're definitely on the right track.
We figure we'll boost our numbers a little bit, then go knocking on the door to get a corporate backing.
I'm sure they want
the day
two
jobs and all that.
Yeah,
I'm sure they want two American Yahoos being the one going through there.
Well,
they can't do anything about
company in Singapore now, so it's
okay. Well, all right. Maybe they'll be more amenable to it. But man, I feel like we didn't say it enough. But thank you so much for talking to us and being available.
It's been really fun. I've literally I have a big case of NMEs from 2013. There's a very low storage room in my home, and I have kept them. And it was always one day they will come in useful, and today has been that day. So
that's good. Yeah, and I hadn't even thought of it, but yeah, I need to pop on eBay and get a physical copy because
make it two.
It's not as fun. It's not as fun clicking through on the online and our own. I had to make our own like Google Doc version of it, and it's like to scroll through and make notes. But yeah, I'm sure I could find it. I'm sure I could find a physical copy somehow.
Yeah, I'm sure you can. It's there are like little blurbs for nearly every one.
Did you get to write any of those?
Yeah, I did. I can't.
I love those when we're going through the list, or we pull up like we do our random number and we pull up a new one. Like one of the more fun things to do is go into the kind of the copy of the longer list and see what the small blurb says. Like that's usually our first, especially if it's a new album we haven't heard of. Like that's our first bit of education about it.
Yeah. I wrote a bit on My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, the Kanye album. A great guy to have been praising. Definitely someone that I stand by. And
yeah. Oh, I forgot what we were talking about. I think we were talking about Jesus.
Yeah.
We had the same conversation, like how unfortunate. Well, because I think it came up because our very first episode was on. And I'm so glad we get to talk about this again. But our very first episode was on Patti Smith's Easter, which I don't know if you know, but it has a
rock and roll.
A trend. Yeah. So our very first episode, we had to sit down and have a conversation about like a heavier conversation than we really wanted to on our very first episode, but it was the same thing. Like what an unfortunate what a great album, but what an unfortunate thing to have to.
Yeah, I mean,
whenever
it comes
to
a guy who had 3 Smiths albums on his top 10, I'm certainly not going to be the case now for one very obvious reason.
Yeah. But that's part of the fun of it, I guess.
Yeah. Like I said, it's a snapshot of time and does not reflect what's happened since it was published. No.
But hey, you got to put on the record with that we do not approve. So, all right. Well,
David, thanks again. Absolutely appreciate your time. It was it
was so much fun.
Really fun. Thank you guys for taking an interest and making me feel that it was worth putting it all together and having it published 10 years ago.
Well, that's just
like I said, it's these things are meant to start conversations and have fun with them. They're not kind of carved in stone and decreed upon people. It's like, this is our idea. What do you think? So it's good to talk it out, even if it is 12 years late.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Check check the episode descriptions for all the links and stuff we talked about. And signing off, ND 500 podcast with David Renshaw. See you guys.
At the Super Bowl, Drake got dissed. Our next guest, he wrote the list. And it's a podcast and you will love it. It's the ND 500.